This episode is brought to you by Energy Outreach Colorado. Energy Outreach Colorado is celebrating 35 years with their Greatest Hits Tour. Since 1989, they've been topping the charts in energy equity while helping thousands of Colorado families keep their homes warm and their lights on. Join their encore performance by donating at energyoutreach.org/donate. Your support ensures their platinum hits keep playing for decades to come. Energy Outreach Colorado, 35 years of #1 hits and still rocking affordable energy for all. Visit energyoutreach.org/donate to help today. This episode is brought to you by Pine Melon. Ever wish you could get farm fresh produce, eggs, dairy, and meat delivered right to your door? Well, thanks to Pine Melon, it's easy to have the Colorado Farmers Market delivered. Get all your small batch local faves you can't find at the chain grocery store dropped right on your doorstep. Simply visit pinemelon.com or download the app and use our code CITYCAST to get 75% off your first time. That's pinemelon.com, and don't forget, use our code CITYCAST to get 75% off. Today on CityCast Denver. For almost 10 years, Nate Miner has been Denver's most influential transportation reporter, leading the conversation around Vision Zero, highway widenings, bike lanes, RTD, and everything else that drives Denverites wild. But he announced last month that he's moving back home to Minnesota. So I'm sitting down with Nate one last time to look back and talk about how Denverites will get around without him. Today is Thursday, April 17th. I'm Bree Davies, and here's what Denver's talking about. Nate Miner, welcome back to CityCast Denver.
Thanks for having me.
One last time.
One last time.
Before you leave.
I know.
Well, I want to talk to you about Vision Zero.
Okay.
You've reported on this for years. We see dozens of preventable deaths on Denver streets every year, yet everyone keeps talking about, we want this to stop. What do you think, what would need to change for us to actually get to this vision, this zero deaths?
Yeah. When I reported a big story about this a couple of years ago, I had to it was hard for me to sort of get my mind into the Vision Zero paradigm because I grew up in America and kind of, have the same thoughts and framework toward the transportation system as I think everyone else did. But the Vision Zero thing is kind of revolutionary in that it's the big zero, that's the goal, right? But on a deeper level, it's about shifting the responsibility for the transportation system from the individual user, from the person behind the wheel, from the person out on the street, on their feet or on a bike, to the people who actually design it and build it. And that kind of blew my mind once that finally clicked. So I guess what I'm saying is to actually reach that zero goal, the city has to take responsibility for the streets out there. And that means doing far fewer public relations campaigns about how important it is to be responsible.
I see those and I honestly, they frustrate me more than anything is slow down. I want that, but I don't see that.
Yeah.
And maybe the roads are not signaling that.
Yeah. So the
design.
The idea with Vision Zero is that is people are going to make mistakes. It is inevitable because people are human. And if you design a transportation system in the right way, mistakes should not be fatal. Right. That's sort of the revolutionary idea here. So for that to be real, you have to slow down your streets. You have to design them in the way where you can't do maybe Federal Boulevard, where the speed limit is, say, 35 miles an hour. You can really do 50, 55.
This street I drive every day, I promise you the average person is not going 35.
Absolutely not.
It's above 40 and above, usually between 40 and 60 miles an hour.
Yeah. So to really see through the Vision Zero thing to its end goal, you would have to have a very different Federal Boulevard. Which would mean maybe one lane in each direction, which would send the west side into a complete tailspin, understandably.
I'm seeing people driving on the sidewalk. You know what I mean? I'm seeing what I'm already seeing, which is there's people that just cut through construction areas, or
Absolutely.
I watched a man drive over all those flexible bollards and park on them. And so I'm just thinking about that mentality versus what what the infrastructure needs to change to, I guess.
Right. And it would be incredibly hard. It would, in some places, I think you could kind of see it because let's look at East Colfax. It's happened there. I wrote a story about this a month or two ago where just looking at the last couple months of crash data on East Colfax, it's fallen a lot.
Really?
Since construction started. And the point I was trying to make in this story is like, yes, well, construction will drag on for a couple of years. We've sort of fast forwarded to the end already in terms of the street layout.
And so this is what people will, even though the construction is going, once it's done, it will
done,
still resemble kind of what it looks, or what the car access will be.
In that there's going to be one lane in each direction. And, people got kind of mad about that story and saying, why are you saying construction is good? And that's not the point. The point is like right now there's one lane in each direction. Cars have to go slow because one car doing the speed limit means everyone has to do the speed limit. And, if you had imagined that as being the situation on East Colfax, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago, you would have thought that's crazy. But they're doing it.
Yeah.
They're doing it. So I guess we'll have to see, are they going to do that on other streets? Federal's harder than East Colfax in a lot of ways because it was built sort of after the age of cars. North Federal is a little streetcar era-y, but really South Federal, especially south of maybe, 10th. That was built in the post-war boom, and you don't really have the density that like an East Colfax has. So to narrow that there is going to, I think, cause a lot more friction. Not that East Colfax has been easy for the city, but the idea of shifting a lot of people onto the bus there is harder because South Federal, big parking lots, kind of post-war sprawl, and that is just, I guess to get back to your original question, if you want to get to zero deaths, the city and other transportation agencies have to really take responsibility for it. But the city also has to be a different kind of city. I
know. I was like, it feels like a culture shift as much as like a focus on infrastructure shift.
A culture shift, also like a complete physical shift in how the city is built. Which is happening slowly, right? The state legislators want more density. City council wants less parking and more density. Probably. We'll see what they do with this parking minimum thing. You'll see. I'll be gone. So let me know how it goes.
I'm sure you'll be watching from afar.
But that's kind of the idea. It's like this is a car city, and to really get to Vision Zero, it's going to have to be much less of one.
Well, so speaking of this sort of topic, you recently reported that the Johnston administration's commitment to improving the city for bikes and pedestrians, despite some recent setbacks, they're working on it. I guess, what is your take on this current mayor and the transit system?
His comments to you maybe 5 or 6 weeks ago were the most in-depth that I've heard. I have tried and failed to get him to talk about his sort of transportation vision. So that was pretty interesting. And he was basically saying like, yeah, transit makes sense where it makes sense, but we can't force everyone to use it because that's just not a reality with how Denver is laid out, which I think is absolutely a fair take.
Yes.
If you are in charge of this city and you need to meet a bunch of people's needs. I think philosophically, a lot of people in power think, understand the challenges of climate change and of accessibility and pedestrian safety, blah, 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 and want to do the right thing there, but also have to deal with the realities of getting people to work, getting people to school. And so the mayor's comments to you, I thought were, not that surprising. They're not exactly revolutionary. And under Hancock, we had years of like, we're going to change everything. This is going to be I think he wanted cars to be like 50 or 60% of commuters, and where right now it's like the vast majority.
Yeah.
So he wanted to like kind of flip that. And Johnston, you're seeing much less rhetoric like that. I will say the Johnston administration is pretty sensitive of their image here. Like the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure reached out to me and wanted Amy to talk to me, Amy Ford, the executive director there, to talk to me about how they were still very much on board with these big ideas of shifting to cars and bikes and transit. But I have to say, like, that community is really losing faith.
I got that from some recent comments from Joe Locantore, I feel like,
right,
about who runs Denver Streets Partnership, It's like I feel her trying to still be optimistic, but I'm thinking about these other signals that we're getting from the administration. Like, we talked to the mayor about this, like reopening 29th and Larimer to cars when it was closed for years to just pedestrians. Or there was that brewery that had to convert their back patio into a parking lot and they didn't even want to do it. And this sort of permanent end to Viva Streets. So I see where pedestrian advocates are feeling like maybe the city is not responding or hearing us.
Does not feel like there's a lot of energy there right now.
Yeah.
The rap I've heard on Dottie right now and Amy Ford is, they will go with whoever spoke with them last. So like on the northwest side, the 29th Avenue bike lane last fall, there was a big fight there over parking and a protected bike lane, similar thing that we've seen played out elsewhere. And ultimately, Dottie dialed back at the very last minute and changed part of that to preserve parking because residents wanted it in one very particular area. I
was going to say, we got a lot of comments about this from folks in the area who are bicycle and pedestrian advocates that were just like so frustrated with that turn over a couple parking spots in place of something that felt like a more continuous and safe bike lane.
Yes, right. And they'll point to surveys that the city did that show that actually most people wanted the protected bike lane. So really what I think happened there is there were a few very loud voices.
Which we see in municipal struggles all the time.
Absolutely.
It's a tale as old as the city is.
Yeah. So
its loudest voices.
It seems like the Johnson administration kind of wants to have its cake and eat it too. They want to be seen as progressive, but also they want to please everyone. And at some point, we're talking about reshaping a city, which is going to challenge people's values and their everyday lives. And that's going to take a little more political courage than trying to please everyone. And I think that is what people like Joe Lograntori are saying, we're not seeing that right now.
Yeah. Well, we'll see in the future. I mean, maybe that's something that could change on council, having a really big advocate. Not that we don't have them now, but someone who's making that their sole mission is often how those kinds of things become a reality.
And you see that from people like Chris Hines,
right.
Who represents downtown and is very much into these ideas, especially around accessibility. Sarah Parody has been making a lot of noise about Pena Boulevard, and they are also just one of many voices on city council.
Yeah. Well, we'll be watching that forever, for sure.
Absolutely.
This episode is brought to you by the Dolores Project. The Dolores Project has been a leader in providing safe, dignified, and trauma-informed shelter and housing for women, transgender, and non-binary individuals in Denver for 25 years. The Dolores Project follows a housing-first approach, prioritizing stable housing as the key to breaking the cycle of homelessness. I love the Dolores Project. I walked in there the other day, and it was just so beautiful, so welcoming. And the thing they told me is that community volunteers provide most of the meals that they serve every day. And folks that interact with the Dolores Project said that's the biggest thing that they love the most is getting to have a home-cooked family meal with friends. Last year, 94% of their supportive housing residents maintained their housing, and 42% of their shelter guests transitioned into permanent or stable housing. The Dolores Project offers 24/7 emergency shelter and permanent supportive housing, helping hundreds of people each year find stability and community. Celebrate 25 years of impact at the Dolores Project's special anniversary event in May, an evening of reflection, community, and action. Get your tickets now and be a part of the movement for lasting housing solutions. Learn more at thedoloresproject.org. That's thedoloresproject.org. This episode is brought to you by Denver Health. Planning an international trip? Before you pack your bags, make sure you're up to date on your vaccines. Different destinations come with different health risks, and there's nothing worse than getting sick on vacation. Denver Health's travel and immunization clinic makes it easy and affordable. Their public health experts will help you figure out exactly what vaccines or prescriptions you need for your trip abroad, and you can get vaccinated during your appointment. Their team can also make sure you're covered with routine immunizations like flu, measles, and tetanus. Also, Montgomery got his measles shot the other day, and he was very brave, and he didn't cry, even though I told him it's totally okay if you cry. But he was very brave, so he got to pick out a new book at the bookstore. Don't let preventable illnesses ruin your adventure. Schedule your appointment today by calling 303-602-3520. That number again is 303-602-3520. Wherever your travels take you, good health should always be a part of life's journey.
Hi, I'm David Plotz, the CEO of CityCast. We've all set health goals: lose weight, exercise more, eat better. But without a plan, those goals often fade. That may have happened to you. It has definitely happened to me. And that's where Prolon comes in. Prolon's 5-day fasting mimicking diet gives you a science-backed, structured approach to stay on track and see real results. And now Prolon is upping their game with the new next-gen 5-day program, delivering the same science-backed benefits in a cleaner, more convenient, and more flavorful format. Prolon is a plant-based nutrition program featuring soups, snacks, and beverages designed to nourish the body while keeping it in a fasting state, triggering cellular rejuvenation and renewal. Next-Gen builds on the original Prolon with 100% organic soups and teas, a richer taste, and ready-to-eat meals. Developed over decades at USC's Longevity Institute and backed by top U.S. medical centers, Prolon has been shown to support biological age reduction, metabolic health, skin appearance, fat loss, and energy. I've been doing the 5-day program, and I feel so much better. I really enjoy the tasty energy bars, the snacks and soups, and the fact that I can enjoy meals, even though the calorie count is super low. The flavors and textures are excellent. An olive oil snack here, broccoli and quinoa soup there, hibiscus tea, a yummy nut bar. It's got the benefits of a 5-day fast, but doesn't have the challenge of doing it with pure liquids. It's a system reset. And also, I know this sounds funny, but it's not. The packaging and directions are fantastic, clear, and well-organized and thoughtful. For a limited time, you can be first in line to experience the new Next Gen at special savings. Prolon is offering CityCast listeners 15% off site-wide, plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe to their 5-day program. Just visit prolonlife.com/city. That's PROLONLIFE.com/city to claim your 15% discount and your bonus gift. prolonlife.com/city.
So CDOT recently unveiled their new plan to revamp the Spear and I-25 interchange. It's something called a divergent diamond. And I have to say, I watched 2 videos on how this is supposed to work for cars, and I do not get it. Can you explain it?
Yeah. So right now, say you're leaving, I almost said Pepsi Center, Ball Arena, and you're heading onto the freeway. So you get onto Spear. And right now, say if you're trying to get on Spear southbound, you just take a big wide left, right? There's like a Conoco and
Yeah.
So right now, or that's what you would do. But in the future, what you will do is before you even cross I-25 on the bridge, you'll actually swoop over to the left side of the road, and then you would go across I-25 on the bridge, and then you just take a little left. And so it's sort of like a twisty kind of thing, which challenges a lot of people because in America we drive on the right side of the road.
Right. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Is like, so what is the purpose of this change of this interchange? Why are we going to this new pattern?
So the pros for it are you can shove more cars through it without increasing the footprint. So historically, if there were a lot of backups in a place like this, the relevant agency would add more lanes. And with the Diverging Diamond, you don't have to do that. It's a more efficient use of space in that more cars can flow through it without physically taking more land. It's also a little bit safer.
That's what I was going to ask.
Yeah, I don't know if I should say a little bit, but it is significantly, it is safer, is what CDOT says, because you don't, by not taking that big left when you're merging onto the freeway, you cut down on the number of T-bone crashes, which are super dangerous. So that's good. The drawbacks are, if this does work the way that CDOT says it will, and it's suddenly easier to move through that intersection in a car, I would expect more people are going to do that.
That was my thought, was like, who is this for?
Well, it's for drivers for sure. Spear and I-25 is a super busy intersection. But, if it is easier to do that, you're going to see more cars there, which is going to make it more difficult to get across those lanes if you're on foot or on bike. The city is also kind of dreaming up a new Spear Boulevard.
Yeah, I was going to say, that was my next question, was how does this sort of fit into that bigger, longer term picture of like where the Ball Arena area and downtown will connect, and then we go all the way into Cherry Creek, and there's a lot of projects.
Yeah, the city put out a paper last year looking at the future of Spear, kind of between, I think this was right, Colfax and I-25. And they're like, hey, maybe we should knock it down to one lane in each direction and, do all sorts of crazy stuff. And this is kind of the complete opposite of that.
Yeah.
So it kind of seems like the city and the state are maybe not really sharing the same vision of what to do with it. So yeah, this CDOT vision would certainly make driving through there easier. And if we can believe the city's vision of a more multimodal future of Spear, I don't really get this about it seems like a conflict.
That kind of was my thought too. Was like, this feels like it's going against this thing we just talked about, which is changing the culture around driving in Denver, but does something like this just when we add it, make it even easier to drive. That feels counterintuitive to the making it easier and safer to not drive.
Yeah, and the planners will always say, like, we're trying to make it better for everyone. But at some point, it is a zero-sum game. Like, it can't be both easier to do everything. That's just not possible. You have to prioritize certain modes. And I'm not here to tell you which is best, but I will tell you that the city has said in documents over and over again that pedestrians, and they have this pyramid, right? Pedestrians on top and bicycles and transit. And at the very bottom is drivers, right? Which, reflects their own beliefs. So I think it's totally fair to hold big projects against that standard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we'll keep watching that too. I mean,
right.
I-25, the never-ending question. Another recent topic, Pena Boulevard.
Pena.
So City Council just approved $15 million for a study to look into some of the alternatives around widening the highway to the airport. It's been very controversial, to say the least. We know the arguments about induced demand when you add lanes, like you were just saying, but also the cost of expanding, like the A line, the light rail. I want your prediction.
It's commuter rail.
I'm sorry, the commuter. You're right, it's commuter rail. But I want your prediction. Like, if you had a bet, what do you think is going to end up happening with the Pena Boulevard conundrum?
Yeah, I think, because this is what Phil Washington told me a couple of years ago, that it will end up being expanded. I think that is where the momentum is. That's what the airport says they want, and they will tell you now, no, we are starting a process, and we're going to listen to what everyone wants and come up with a design. But Phil told me outside of city council a couple of years ago that he wanted a, quote, very responsible expansion. So I think that's probably what they're going to try to do.
I'm also just thinking about this is, I think, Stacey Gilmore's district.
Yep.
And I feel like she's talked about that also just being the main way in and out of the community.
Yeah.
So that might signal that the community also, in maybe some contingent of it, wants that expansion as well.
Yeah, for sure. And Stacey Gilmore represents her constituents, and I think at some level we have to trust that she is reflecting what they want. Also, my former colleague Rebecca Tauber at Denverite spent some time in Green Valley Ranch and Montbello and those neighborhoods at like farmers markets talking to people. And the quotes I remember from residents were like, yeah, using the train would be great, but I commute across town and it just is not. It's
not a reality.
Yeah.
I can't get there nearly in, enough time compared to driving, which
Right.
I understand, because Green Valley Ranch is very far if you work downtown.
Right, totally. So I would expect that is what is going to happen there. I think it'll probably be some sort of managed lane, which we see on like I-25 between the Springs and Denver, or Fort Collins in Denver. And it's a toll lane, but also buses can use it.
Okay.
Right.
So that's a managed lane is...
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a toll lane. CDOT wants to call it managed lanes, but I call them toll lanes, which would be good for transit, right? Because if you are a bus, you just slide into that lane and suddenly you can skip traffic on the way to the airport. So I think it could mean some improvements for transit. But there are certainly other ways to do it without expanding the freeway. You could make better use of E470, which already exists. You could, it's sort of shocking not knowing what's possible with the A line. RTD has no interest in making it better. The city doesn't really know what they can do with it. The airport doesn't want to touch it. And like, what if someone stood up and said, like, hey, what if we had an express train from from Union Station to the airport, and you could get between the two in 20 minutes.
Oh my God.
Would be a game changer.
It's such a no-duh, too. It just feels like that is what.
Yeah.
That would be so, because I do know lots of folks that do take the, like, we always joke about this, like, whose families were willing to take them to the airport and whose aren't. And,
I get it.
My family is very willing to. My husband's family is like, good luck. But, like, if we had that option, it would be better. But I also have to say, I don't think that the city has really ever prioritize that, because it took us 20 years to get the train in the first place.
Right. And RTD barely got it done. They were cutting corners like crazy. And that's sort of the point now. What would it cost to go in and uncut those corners, to double track it so that trains could run more often, maybe even express trains someday, right? And that is, the airport, I think, would argue, like, look, most people drive to the airport. We have to continue building out the system that most people use, which on one level you're like, yeah, I get it, because the A line is of no use to someone coming from Fort Collins or whatever, and DIA's customer base is like, I don't know, Wyoming to like Trinidad, right?
Yeah.
So like they have a lot more people to worry about than the people in these sort of A line adjacent areas. But also the city has said they want to radically reshape how people move. And so at some point it's like, well, are you going to do that or not?
Yeah, these things have to come together here. But another one of those wait and sees.
For sure.
I just want to clarify, too. Phil Washington is the CEO.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. Phil Washington is the CEO of DIA. Okay, this is a really big, broad question, but it's something I know you think a lot about. How do you think BRT is going?
I mean, we don't really know because it hasn't started yet. On East Colfax, I mentioned this earlier, but we're already seeing what the road configuration is going to be with the construction, because we're
already sort of training folks to what it will be like to use that.
Traffic is moving slower. The transit is not particularly great there right now because, have you seen those temporary bus stops?
Oh my God.
They're so weird. The whole thing is just like, I can see where it could be just confusing on trying to figure out how to navigate as a bus rider or a pedestrian. Yeah. With federal funding in question for future BRT projects, I think you're going to see a lot of value engineering of CDOT trying to figure out how to do these projects cheaper, because I don't think the feds are going to kick in money. So they're what CDOT says is they are going to try to stick to their current timeline of 2030 to open Colorado Boulevard and Federal Boulevard, but I think it's going to be a lot more modest than what they had initially planned. But I mean, look, the biggest thing that they can do is run service more often, and better stations, signal priorities, even some exclusive lanes where they can. That's all going to make a big difference. The question is, like, are those the right streets to do it on? Are people going to respond to it and use it? Yeah. I mean, really, those streets are just so different from East Colfax. Yeah. East Colfax is makes a ton of sense from BRT, but Federal and Colorado are just these wide monsters. And so at some level, like, if it makes them a little bit more narrow, even if you never use the bus, maybe it becomes less of a wall. Yeah. Like a little slower, or a little safer. I don't have much hope for Colorado Boulevard or Federal. For that matter. We'll see. Yeah. And I think a lot of it's going to come down to how courageous CDOT and the city are in trying to take some of that space. If it's still 6 or 7 lanes wide and there's just more fancy bus stops there, like, what did we really accomplish here? Yeah, did we change habits? Did we change behaviors? That's the tough part. I know. Yeah. I have to say, I just fell for it like hook, line, and sinker, looking at all these, like, if we have BRT on Federal and Alameda and Colfax and Colorado Boulevard, and I was like, oh, by 2030, my son will be able to be a teenager and just get all over the city. And now I'm like, I guess we'll see. Yeah. And not to talk up the city I'm moving to, Minneapolis and St. Paul. But I was just going to say. Yeah, they've been doing BRT for the last almost decade, but they're doing it on smaller streets. They're doing it on a street more akin to like Downing, not super wide, but there's a lot of density along Downing. They're also not taking lanes of traffic for the most part, but they are running them more often. The bus stations are sweet. They're really great. They feel more like train stations. And people are responding. Like even in the post-pandemic world, they are seeing ridership increases on those lines.
So there's hope is what you're saying.
So there's hope, but it's interesting to note that they are doing them on smaller streets. They're not really doing it on the big federal Colorado style streets.
Interesting approach.
Yeah.
Well, remains to be seen. So you're leaving Denver. You've been covering transit here for a long time. I'm just wondering if there's like any spicy takes you couldn't give as a transit reporter that you want to air out now.
I mean, I've kind of said, I think, the spiciest things, which is like, the story of transportation in Denver and increasingly in Colorado with CDOT under Jared Polis is like this stated desire to change everything, to modernize how people move, and sometimes that is not reflected in the big ticket projects that these agencies shove hundreds of millions of dollars into.
I'm thinking about your series, Ghost Train. And just thinking about these big dream projects and sometimes what happens. But I don't know, was there anything that was proposed but never built that you were surprised by? Or
it'll be interesting to see what happens with the Welton Street light rail line.
Yes.
In Fast Tracks in 2004, RTD said, we're going to extend that all the way up to 38th and Blake. And now I don't know that anyone in power is really pushing for that. I certainly have not heard a peep from the mayor's administration about it. And that would be, unlike so many train stations in RTD system, it would actually be through a dense area. It would connect destinations. And really what I'm hearing more of lately is like, maybe we should take the light rail infrastructure out of Welton Street entirely.
That's what I've heard too, which is so interesting because it's been about a little over 20 years since it's been in there. And I would
30. That was the first line. That goes back to 94. Yeah.
And I would love to. I mean, I know business owners have expressed
right, and business owners I think are reflecting, the challenges that they face every day. But also there is a history there. I don't know the current situation. I have not reported that, but I will tell you that in reporting the Big Train series, I talked to folks who were in that area 30 years ago, and people were opposed to it. They thought it would come in and kill businesses on Welton Street. And so they got it curtailed. It was supposed to go all the way down MLK out to the old airport. Never did that. So now it just ends at that little stub on Downing Street. So, what to do with that, I think is going to say a lot about the city's priorities. And, maybe light rail isn't right there. Speaking of Jill Locantore, she's told me, maybe, walking there as a pedestrian on Welton and all of a sudden this massive train rolls by, it just feels out of place.
Yeah.
Like it's this massive piece of equipment that could crush you. So maybe a bus lane and more frequent service between downtown and 38th and Blake would do just as well at serving people.
One last question about your favorite organization, RTD. The latest news is that thousands of riders have abandoned RTD due to the slowdowns on light rail lanes last year. But I want to broadly give you the topic. Any last words about or for RTD?
Wow. RTD. Yeah. No, they were, when I moved here, I remember sitting in my apartment in Fargo, North Dakota, where I moved from, and kind of gaming out how I would move around the city and where I would want to live and how I would get to work. And at the time, Colorado Public Radio was way down by IKEA. And I thought, I don't know if I want that kind of life. And then I saw there was a light rail line. And I was like, okay. And then I did that commute for like 5+ years. And
where did you end up living?
Down by the University of Denver. So I was just barely in the city. But I could take the train to work. Yeah. And I did that for a long time and it worked and I liked it. There were some challenges, but for the most part, like you'd show up at the station and if you miss your train, there was another one rolling in like 8 minutes.
So you're like, oh, this is great.
Yeah. And then everything kind of changed. And some of that is pandemic and that's kind of out of RTD's hands. But certainly it is an organization that overextended itself and did not have a resiliency plan. And under Deborah Johnson, who the agency brought in 2020, she was supposed to come in and like make a bunch of tough calls and sort of get this agency back on track. And talking to folks on the board that are responsible for it, talking to folks in the community, like the advocates, and also the people that want to use RTD.
Yeah.
They are so incredibly disappointed in that agency right now.
It's frustrating, I think.
Yeah, because a lot of people had an experience like I did where it was a useful part of their lives, and now they want to use it and they can't.
Yeah.
And I think, it is undermining a lot of projects around the city. People want the city to be, growing and moving forward, and I think the lack of reliable, good transit is really, really hurting RTD's own credibility. But gosh, I don't know.
It's hard. I just think about every time a person from Denver visits another place with a good transit system, and then we come back and we're like, you're not going to believe this. The train in DC, amazing. New York, it's famous. Why can't we do that? You know what I mean? And so that's just like, I'm thinking about my own personal experience, but I do think that growing up here, the conversation, it was like the last resort. Right? Which is like not a way to think about transit. But I wonder if there's a lot of folks like me that grew up here that's the general thought, instead of this is a great way to help the climate.
And that is so common for American cities. Transit is sort of the last resort thing. But RTD is so interesting because 20 years ago, they were like, no, we're going to be more than that. And they got everyone super pumped. They got mayors and a majority of citizens to say, like, yes, that is the transit system that I want. And now to be here 20 plus years later, and like RTD did so much. Like, Denver has a train system that other cities
this was built out in my lifetime.
Can only be jealous of.
For sure.
But it doesn't feel useful.
Yeah.
And that is so hard.
It's very frustrating.
And I think some of it's going to come together with new housing and stuff, development happening around these stations eventually. But in the meantime, it's like we've got this system out there, and it just feels like it is not what we thought it would be. And that's really tough.
Well, Nate, this has been so lovely. And I know a lot of our longtime listeners, especially our transit folks, are going to be really happy to have been able to hear you before you head off to your next chapter in life.
Yeah, I have lived in Denver now longer than I have lived in any city.
That's awesome.
And I will never be a native. And I acknowledge that.
I won't either. I'm not technically.
But my son is, and I've lived here, a decade plus, and I think that counts for something. So thank you to everyone for welcoming me. I was a stranger in a strange land a decade ago, and now this feels like a part of my life forever. So thank you.
That's all for today here on CityCast Denver. If you enjoyed this show, why not take a minute to tell RTD CEO Deb Johnson about us? Rate the show wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to our morning newsletter and learn more about us at denver.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye-bye. I'm happy for you, but I am sad for our transit coverage, honestly.